Now, the second argument I want to give you, and this is more in the empirical line, that should suggest that the world does not, in fact, look like it has a God in it. That's the problem of suffering, and this is also known as the problem of evil. Now, God's attributes tend to conflict with the idea that evil exists, since, of course, if God's all-powerful, there's something he can do about evil. If he's all good, there's something he should want to do about evil, and, of course, if he's all-knowing, he knows what to do about evil. Nevertheless, it's pretty clear that unnecessary suffering exists out there. Now, I'm making some assumptions in order to get a contradiction out of these ideas. One would be that omnipotence requires God to do everything except for logical impossibilities. That is, there are all kinds of physical impossibilities that human beings can't accomplish, but these can't bind God. His omnibenevolence seems to me to suggest that he should seek to eliminate evil wherever he can as far as is possible. Now, if you take a look at me, once again, this limited being with only a tiny little bit of goodness, I'm nevertheless obliged to deal with all the evil that I possibly can. So why would this be a bad assumption to expect of God, the moral arbiter of the cosmos? Oops, oh, and just a qualification, we have two kinds of evil, one being natural evil, disasters, disease, etc. like that, and moral evil, or that done by free agents. Now, there's typically two solutions to the problem of evil that people favor, since they seem to be regarded as the most successful. I'd like to indicate how they're not exactly very successful. One is called the soul-making theodicy. And the idea here is that God must allow natural evil in order to encourage the development of moral qualities, such as, for example, compassion. Compassion is something that moves us to try and eliminate evil so far as is possible. And, of course, you need some evil in order to inspire this. So the general form of this is that a world without evil and a world with evil, and no compassion, and on the other hand, compassion, we have two different choices here. The world without evil and no compassion is good, but the world with evil and compassion is considered to be a better world, and therefore the one God would create. Now, there's some problems with this idea. One is simply that moral qualities without evil is only a practical impossibility and not something God couldn't do. God can do better than that. Now, how much evil do you suppose is necessary to create moral qualities? Well, I reckon it's a good deal less than what we can see around us. And it also happens to be a fact that evil also tends to create indifference, callousness, and despair. Now, finally, let me point out something to you. Is a world with evil and moral qualities in it really better? Well, consider this. What's the value of compassion? Well, as I've suggested, it's plausible to think that compassion is something that helps us or moves us to minimize suffering. Now, in other words here, compassion presupposes evil. In other words, compassion would have no value in a world with no evil. And therefore, the world with evil, without evil and without the moral qualities would be the better world, in fact, because, as a matter of fact, without evil, compassion, for example, would have no value. So that wouldn't be a worse world. Now, there's the free will theodicy, and I guess I'm going to have to hurry up a bit here. Typically, the idea here is that God must allow moral evil as a creation of creating free beings. And of course, you recognize free will requires potential to create for good and bad choices, or good and evil choices. And free will is necessary for persons to exist, since supposedly we need free will to become moral beings and enter into relationships and that sort of thing. So the general form here is, again, that the world with free will in it and evil is going to be the better choice, and therefore that's what God ought to be doing. Now, I think there's some problems once again. Now, is it really true, is a being that freely makes all good choices really a logical impossibility? Well, what about God? because I have this quaint idea that God might well be an all-good being, making all good choices, and also free because he's a moral being. Now, what is it going to be then? If free will is logically inconsistent with all good choices, is it true that God doesn't make all good choices, or is it true that God's not free? Once again, we have a contradiction. Now, what is the point of moral development? Let's imagine this. Everybody here should be trying to make as many good choices as possible. Say you're at 50% good choices right now, and you struggle your way up to get to 70% good choices. Now you struggle your way up further to get better and better, and when you get to 99% good choices, you're still choosing freely to make these good choices. But here's the catch. When you tip up, if there's a logical contradiction between making all good choices and having a free will, when you tip over from 99 to 100% good choices, all of a sudden you're no longer free and no longer a moral being. Well, that makes no sense of the idea that we can develop morally if the ultimate goal is actually a logical contradiction. And finally, free will only requires the potential for free choices, for evil choices, and not necessarily the actuality. So God could then create potential for free choices and have moral beings because of that, but have them never actually choose evil. Let me see where I can go in 30 seconds. Let me just skip over this. I want to give you one final thought here. I think there's a reason in typical theology why the problem of evil is not solvable, and that is the existence of hell in some theologies. Hell presupposes an eternal suffering, and that would be something that no one could merit in any life, however bad, any finite life. So hell essentially is a crime against humanity. I guess I'm done.
That's time. Thank you, Dr. Williamson. So we've heard the opening arguments for and against the question, does God exist? Now the second formal section of this debate is the rebuttals. Now during this section, each of the debaters will have a 12-minute portion to take apart the other debater's case and to strengthen the hypothesis of their own arguments. So, to begin the rebuttals, please welcome back to the podium Dr. Gray.